Basically, I've done some research, and as much as I want to continue believing in the king and all the people, especially Merlin, it's probably not true, the accumulated legend of it. Maybe bits and pieces may have happened historically in reality, but how it grew to the proportion that it is now in the common mind, that is a perfect example of how things snowball and get so distorted. But let me explain why. Even today, we've got leaders who are not honest. That's an understatement. When they put out ideas of themselves to maintain power, to have support, to make the population or to make their enemies fear them, to create a sense of awe. They will put a spin on things. They will put out misinformation. They will put out propaganda. And sometimes these things get lodged into the knowledge base, and it will survive beyond the person. And then maybe not immediately, but within a century, 5 centuries, however long, it starts to come back, and then there's no way to prove it because nobody is alive anymore to remember the truth. And because of that, you get these legends. And probably almost half of what we hear about figures from the past is not true. It's a distortion. It puts an emphasis on certain aspects of human life, of archetypal symbolism. And this leads to the real reason behind it, why these things go on, is because at all periods of history, we as a society need to have something as a symbol to help us understand what we're going through. We need just basic forms of something to be able to communicate. And this is why there's an archetype. King Arthur is an archetype from that period for those people that were consuming it. And this here we need to get into a little bit of the history. The supposed era of King Arthur is the 6th century. So this was approximately 600 years after Jesus existed. And the reason why I'm bringing up Jesus to compare to King Arthur and vice versa is because he's a messianic figure. Even today, there is an aspect of the legend, and many books still being written, and comic books and movies, which will tell you that King Arthur is going to return to save his people from some kind of future problem. Now, unfortunately, if King Arthur never existed, he's not going to return either. You can't return if you're never here to begin with. So how does this tie in with Merlin? Well, Merlin also is a very questionable figure because according to very easily found factoids, there was a composite created to make this legend of Merlin. And how Merlin was associated with King Arthur is always fluctuating. Sometimes he's involved with the birth of Arthur and the creation of his kingdom. Sometimes he's only involved up to a certain point, and then he doesn't become the tutor or the teacher, the guru of King Arthur. But then in the most colorful aspects of the legend, Merlin is there with a guiding hand over all the affairs of King Arthur, because Merlin is this wise, mysterious sage. And this is why mystery has to really go over Merlin. We need to ask the most important question, regardless of whether or not historically these people ever existed in their time in the 6th century. Regardless of that. Because we're not living in the 6th century, obviously. What century are we living in? I don't know. We're kind of in a virtual century right now, but this is the 21st century. If we're not in the 6th century, that means it doesn't matter. We have all this information about a character, about a legendary figure. And why do we keep it alive? I don't keep it alive myself. I'm just kind of taking a detached view, seeking omniscience on all types of knowledge, especially mysterious things. But many children, on their own, kind of gravitate toward the subject. And they will start reading it, they will start seeking any kind of information. And that's why it's very common to see these cinematic renditions on TV, or they'll release a movie, they'll do an animated version. Disney also covered the legend. That usually happens because there's a give and take going on. They know there's an interest, so they will capitalize on it. And then the people and the masses will come to it, and it goes back and forth until it generates this hype and this body of interest in the culture. It's being kept alive. It's being kept as one of the top subjects of interest. And yet this was, what, 6th century originally? And actually, the first major works, which was from a author named Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century. So this is approximately 600 years even after they existed, if they even existed. And that was a story that people were consuming, and it blossomed from there into the 13th century and beyond, all the way up till now. It's a British question. It's from the formation of Britain, sub-Roman. After Rome started to change, go into decline, and Britain became independent, and there was a whole creation of the Angles and the Saxons and the Brits and the Welsh and the Celts. You had Anglo-Saxon conglomeration happening through that period. So the people during that time in that area of the world, and as they spread their culture elsewhere, had this as one of their ancient myths. So they had a need to explain life that way. This is their cosmology. Even though it's not true, historically, most likely, and I would probably willing to bet 99% or higher that none of this actually occurred historically. Yet, 100%, it is very important to study King Arthur and Merlin so you can understand the psyche and the deep, long-term, subconscious, and foundation of the British civilization, the British nation, the British culture, and anything associated with it. With this, it also includes the United States and Europe and also Australia and various other places, but those are the main ones. That's all connected in with King Arthur, Merlin, the Knights of the Round Table, and all the women that are involved. There's some accounts and some movies that are made where Queen Mab is actually Arthur's supernatural mother. She's a bit of a sorceress, a witch. This Queen Mab was a master over the old time religion, which is pre-Christian. So in a way, this story is being used to show a great transition during that time. So either 5 or 6 centuries after Jesus Christ lived on the side of the Mediterranean, several thousand miles away from the British Isles, when it spread and got there within those centuries, and it started to convert people and to convert the leaders to a new form, a hybrid form of Christianity into the British Isles. It was in a conflict with the old ways, the old star religion, whether you want to call it paganism or whether you want to call it magic with Celtic influence, or purely it was Celt, or maybe it was Druidic, or maybe it just had regional flair wherever you went, depending on who was the reigning influence. Things were very much regionalized and didn't have contact with anything else for longer periods of time than what we're used to. So this is just part 1. If there's a great interest, I'm going to continue on this, but I think I made the major points. Thanks for listening. This is the first of my big series of mysteries.